I'll leave it for Grace to open with some thoughts, related to her work and her journey. And then, we'll open it for you all to ask her whatever question you want. So yeah, thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun, and it's my favorite topic. Like, I've always considered myself sort of a spiritual seeker, and I'm really interested in sort of like the meaning of life and why are we here and what's the purpose and all that. I used to drive my friends crazy in high school when I would ask them these kinds of questions, and people were not really interested in engaging me at all. And so when I could find someone who could talk to me about some of these bigger issues, I always got very excited, and then it became sort of my life's work. So I'm really grateful for that. I was joking with Professor Ramadan yesterday that, it's like if you want to think of the fastest way to tell your friends and family and the people around you that you've gone crazy, or lost it, that the thing you do is you tell them, I've decided to convert to Islam. And they'll think, okay, what is wrong with you? Especially now. And I mean, I converted back in 1994, which was pre 9/11, and also, pre the rise of the Islamophobia industry, which is the context that we live in now. And, so pretty much if you're not even really paying attention and you're just watching the news or just doing whatever, you get a very, distinct negative impression about Muslims. You just sort of think that they're not really human, they're kind of crazy, they like to kill people, they're all potentially terrorists, there's nothing that they have in common with humanity or with, Western civilization or, civilized people. And that's all by design. And I know you guys have probably done some of your readings this week on Islamophobia, but it's a real industry. Billions of dollars, if not more, are poured into it. And unfortunately, some of the biggest players are the leaders of Muslim countries. So we are often very, very critical in our work. We have a 501c3 education institute. We're focused on ethics, we're focused on beauty and humanism and justice and mercy and how to live as an ethical Muslim in 2023, with the challenges that we have today. And so my husband is a scholar of Islam. He's spent his entire life studying this tradition. And he's known as a sheikh, which is just an Arabic word for a learned person. And we do a virtual Friday prayer service that we've been doing since January of 2019, so 1 year before COVID hit. So and he literally gets up on the prophet's pulpit, as we call it. We have a book called The Prophet's Pulpit, and I'll say more about that later. But he literally gets up on the pulpit and he calls out, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and, Egypt and the US and, pretty much anywhere he sees injustice happening that, traces back to, an undermining of this very beautiful tradition. He'll call it out. And, and he's one of the very few people who will do that, because there's definitely a political cost in doing that. And, a lot of people, it's a very complicated story, but I think it is really very simple in the sense that it comes down to money. So we obviously live in a wartime economy. A lot of people have a lot to profit from, war and weapons and just having an enemy. And so this is the time when Islam is that enemy. And, it was very convenient for 9/11 to happen. There's certainly a lot of conspiracy theories about, who was responsible for 9/11 and what was the, story behind it. But, clearly, as if you guys know, after 9/11, we started the war on terror and went after people who were not even connected necessarily to the actual Saudi attacks, or the New York attacks, World Trade Center attacks. So anyway, it's a very long, complicated, story. But I think that the easiest way to really connect with it is to know, what is your general impression when you think of Muslims and Islam in our time? And if you also think about, if you look around the world and you see, who as a people, if you think of Muslims as a people, who are the most oppressed, who are in concentration camps in China, who are the people that are in war-torn areas, who has the largest number of refugees right now? It's Muslims. Who's got the largest population of orphans? It's Muslims. And these are things that people don't necessarily talk about, but that's just the reality. It's the world that's been created, and it continues. And unfortunately, with the complicity of, these Muslim governments that basically do everything in their power to keep Muslims down, because for them, it's not an issue of faith. It's not an issue of conviction. It's an issue of power. It's an issue of money. So there's not really anything too, unusual about that. And they really benefit when people think of Muslims as inhuman, people who, it's okay if you oppress them, it's okay if you kill them, they're not real people. They're people that, are accustomed to violence, and they're accustomed to being oppressed. This is who they are. They're Arab, they're this, they're that, and the other thing. There are a lot of tropes that are, very much in play. And people just, passively understand that this is what Muslims are if you're not paying attention. So the only way that you can really counter that is through education, and that's what we really try to do. We have, 100,000 book library. It's been a life's work in our nonprofit, and it's a library that spans, 1,400 years of intellectual history, and is really a testament to a very beautiful humanistic faith, because Muslims were at one time at the height of civilization, and a lot of the stuff that we benefit from today, everything from our number system to coffee to a lot of technological advances, they trace back to the Islamic civilization when people really understood that it's important to be at the forefront of everything in your time, whether it's knowledge, whether it's exploration, whether it's ethics, faith and all of that. So that's kind of the backdrop. We're trying to teach people, reconnect them with this message, teach the Quran, which is our holy book, and help Muslims kind of fight back against. They've been in victims to colonialism for several hundred years now, and there's a lot of cost to that. People, Muslims have forgotten the beauty of their message. And so we tried to go back and do deep dives into the meaning of the Quran. We just finished a 3-year project where my husband shared sort of his lifelong journey and research with this holy book, which was not just like researching books, but it was also a lot of time spent in prayer, in reflection, in trying to study. Like he became obsessed with this idea of when the Islamic message was revealed 1,400 years ago, it was revealed to, a bunch of like desert dwellers, like people that were so backwards in their time that people in their age were kind of like, don't even spend time. These people are like, they're tribal, they're not really interested in anything elevated, don't even worry about them, they're not an issue. And something happened where a revelation came in that time and turned these desert dwellers into civilization builders. And so, my husband became very obsessed with the idea of like, okay, well, what in the world came? What was the message? What was it that lit these people on fire and turned them from being very tribal, just, people in the desert, to people who are interested in like building an ethical society, reaching heights, of civilization, being an inspiration to the other people in their time. And so he thought that the way to get at that is to try and go back and read as much as he could, published and unpublished sources, to see like, okay, what was the impact? What was the message that they received? How did they understand it? How did it change the things that were happening at that time? What transformed in that society? Who were the players? What were the Arabic poets writing about? How are they talking about their enemies? How are they talking about this new message that was coming? And kind of piecemealed together so much that he discovered, which is original to him, is that every single chapter, there's 114 chapters in the Quran, every single chapter has its own unique moral message, as 114 parts of the whole. And it's a moral message that is timeless, that applies to humanity. So part of our challenge was understanding, like, okay, what is this message? What are the moral messages? And then how do we apply that in 2023 when we have issues like pornography and internet and human trafficking and, refugees, things that didn't exist back then. But if you believe that this revelation and this message is to humanity and also timeless, that there has to be, a way that you say, okay, mercy is, one of the foundational values. We talk about compassion and mercy, and God is compassionate and merciful. Well, mercy meant something different 1,400 years ago than it does today. And so part of engaging with like understanding this moral message is, okay, well, what does mercy look like today in 2023? What does compassion look like? What does justice look like? A lot of these values are dependent also on the context that you're in and the people that are around you and the understanding of things. So it's a very interesting, that's been like our engagement. And if you're interested in any of what we've been doing, we have our own YouTube channel. And so everything that we've done, all the classes we've been holding are free and on YouTube. And our channel is Usuli, USULI Institute. We have a website, usuli.org. And so it's kind of an interesting, I mean, I guess what's unusual about it is we do these deep dives into the chapters, and we've been doing it, but also I also give an introduction at the beginning of every class. And a lot of times people are kind of surfing YouTube and they see this woman, she's not wearing a scarf, and she's sitting next to this guy that looks like this classic Arab, sheikh with a big beard. And they're like, okay, what is this picture? It's so strange. And, and then they like click on it. And sometimes I get like really hateful messages where it's like, hey, how dare you speak about the tradition because you're not wearing a scarf? And, and then other times I get really beautiful messages, which is like, thank you for speaking because, you're talking about something that is, relatable, and, we feel like we can connect with you. And so, one of the things that's really important to me and why I really value these kinds of opportunities to talk is that, for me personally, it was such a gift to be able to become Muslim. Like I always believe that the biggest gift that God gave me was allowing me to become Muslim. And then the second greatest gift was allowing me to meet my husband, because I didn't know him. Like a lot of times people go, oh, she probably converted because she got married to someone. But I actually found, I was on my own faith journey, and it's kind of started around the time like you guys are starting, college. I went to Berkeley as an undergrad. And so, well, let me finish this. So, I love these opportunities because I feel like I want to share my story, and I want to tell people that, Islam is not as people, think of it, because it's been, exoticized. People, like there's been so much money poured into this effort to teach people, Islam is so foreign and it's so, unrelatable, and it's just simply not true. But so kind of my journey started, I guess, when I was, at Berkeley. My story that my parents were, immigrants from Taiwan, and they really wanted kind of me to assimilate, or, the whole idea of success was assimilating into like white culture and, upper middle class culture. I grew up in Palo Alto, California. And so ended up in Berkeley on that kind of trajectory. I joined a sorority, and I was doing all kinds of like American white things, going to parties and doing what, and thinking that, okay, this is the road to success, right? Because success is, part of this, getting a good job, getting a good education, having the white picket fence, doing what everybody else does, assimilating nicely. And so when I was at Berkeley, that was my life. And I found that it was very empty and very, disappointing in many ways. And, and I thought, okay, I'm on a trajectory. I want to go to business school. And so after I graduated from Berkeley, I worked for a few years in like commercial real estate. And then I applied to Cornell Business School, or I applied to business school and went to Cornell, and then arrived at Cornell and like had this huge case of imposter syndrome, where I looked around it and I was like, oh my God, everyone here has their act together. They're so successful. And I feel like someone made a mistake and allowed me in, and, I'm just, what's going on. And so that kind of triggered my own, like search for something more meaningful. And so like I said, I've always been kind of obsessed with this idea of like, okay, what's the meaning of life, and what's my purpose, and why am I here? And, and all of this. And so here I was surrounded by, these really smart, together people, and I just felt so lost, and I felt like such, like I didn't like myself and didn't know what was my purpose or anything. And I met a couple of classmates who were Muslim, and I didn't know anything really about Muslims, but one of them prayed 5 times a day, which I was like, completely blew me away. I'm like, what? Why would anyone do that? Like, why would someone pray 5 times a day? That's such an act of devotion, And then I thought, oh, maybe that's what's missing in my life is, maybe it's religion. And so then I decided to go to the library, and I checked out a book on Islam. And the one thing, I always believed in God. I don't know why, but just from the time I was little, I just believed in like a higher power. So I thought, okay, well, that's the one thing that I know. And then I started reading this book on Islam, and I was really shocked when I discovered that the tenets of the faith were what I already always believed. It was like very familiar to me. It was like, everything about being a good person, and, just all the things that, as a human being that you should do as a good person. And then I was always kind of struck with, okay, my family had largely converted to Christianity because it was kind of their act, of assimilation into white culture. And so, but I was a very logical person. So this whole issue of Trinity was very confusing, and I didn't buy it. And I'm like, well, if nothing else, my God has to be logical. So I don't, the Trinity thing doesn't make sense to me. And then, in terms of Judaism, well, first of all, I was like, okay, I believe in one God, so I know it's a monotheistic faith that I believe in. So that makes me either a Jew or a Christian, or God forbid a Muslim, So Christianity was like, okay, well, Trinity, don't really get that. Judaism was like, well, they kind of believe that you have to be born a Jew, and then you're a chosen person. Well, I wasn't born a Jew, and I didn't get the sense that they really were welcoming converts. And so I'm like, oh God, okay, so I'm not Jewish, I'm not Christian, so that I'm Muslim. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, and I didn't know enough about it. So I thought, okay, well, at least I'll read, and got into a habit of like reading and a little bit every night before I went to bed, and talking to God, which was like a new thing, because even though I believed in God, I was not in conversation with God. And so I started to feel like, okay, God, I feel really lost, and can you help me? And I'm reading, and, anyway, so it was like the start of that faith journey. And then as the more that I knew, the more I just felt like very intrigued. But I had a really hard time with the idea of being Muslim, because there was just so much baggage associated with it. I thought Muslims were just, again, like what people think now, but now it's worse. But back then it was like, oh, okay, I just don't see it. And if I tell my friends and I tell my family, they're really going to think that something went wrong with me. But over time, I mean, it took like another 2.5 years or something to kind of, read more, learn more, think more, talk to God more, build that relationship. And, it wasn't until after I graduated from Cornell and I got my first job in brand management at Johnson & Johnson, just a bunch of things kind of came together. And, I mean, there are so many stories, but I decided to convert. I mean, actually, it wasn't even that I decided to convert. So actually, I'll tell you this very fast story. When I moved to North Brunswick, New Jersey, outside of Princeton, which is where after my first job was. And so just getting to know people, I decided to sign up for like an adult school class. And it was one of these classes where you show up and they bring a different speaker on Islam. And, I just wanted to meet people. So after the first class, I went up to the professor, and he was this really nice old Arab man. And I said, I'm new to the area. I'm interested in Islam. And he was like, who is this Chinese woman that's interested in Islam? Oh my gosh. Okay. He's like, I'll bring someone from the community to talk to you. And so the next week, this guy shows up, and he came to meet me. And then he said, okay, can I ask you some questions? I understand you're interested in Islam. And I said, yeah, sure. So he said, well, do you believe in one God? And I said, yes, I do. And, do you believe in the prophets and the angels and the books of God? He kind of asked me a bunch of different things that had to do with like the tenets of faith. And I said, yeah, I do, and then finally he said, okay, well, do you believe that the Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet of God? And I said, well, yeah, actually I do. And he said, well, congratulations, you're a Muslim. And it's Ramadan, it's the month of Ramadan. So tomorrow you need to start fasting, and you're a Muslim now. That was my conversion story. And, it was interesting because at that point I had been, like studying and reflecting and praying. And I knew in my heart that Islam was the true message, but I had no intention really of converting. And then when he said that, I wasn't like, whoa, wait, no, I don't want to be Muslim. I was kind of like happy, it was like, I felt like God had sent someone to kind of push me over the finish line, like, okay, you're done now, go, and so that was like a surprise. And, that was on my own. And then the first year as a Muslim was very confusing because I had never been to a mosque before. And I was like, okay, now that I've converted, I need to go meet my people, which was like, I had no idea anything about the community. I had nothing, didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I show up at the mosque, and, I start going to classes, and I start hearing a very strange, like, cultural message, which is really what I think a lot of people are exposed to now. But I came to Islam through books, through learning, through like, this makes sense to me, when I pray, when I talk to God, this is like, this makes sense to me. And then when I interacted with the Muslim community, it was a very different experience. And so my first year as a Muslim was very, very confusing and spiritually kind of oppressive. And, you know, I just didn't understand like why it was so different from what I had learned and what had drawn me to Islam. So then a year later, I actually went back to my high school reunion and met my previous classmate who was a hijab wearing woman. And I used to make fun of her when I was in middle school and high school, and used to think, you know, what kind of crazy person would wear a scarf? And then I realized, oh my God, she's known the secret of life that I've been searching for my entire life. And I can't wait to meet her again. So she gave me as a gift the lecture tapes of my husband. And then I started listening to them and I was like, oh my God, this is what brought me to Islam. Because his approach was very much like, okay, God gave us an intellect and God expects us to use it. So let's take a look at the tradition, you know, and he was walking people through traditions of women, like women jurists, like very highly educated women in Islamic history. And it's like, okay, let's look at these biographical entries of these women and look at their lives and let's reflect on what that says about, you know, Islam and even like the condition of women in our age. But the whole approach was very like, let's look at the evidence, let's think about it, let's think about what's beautiful, you know, what's ethical, what is it that God wants from us as human beings? How can we improve the world? You know, how can we, it was just a very active engagement. And I thought, oh my God, this is what brought me to Islam. And I can't believe like this last year, I felt so spiritually, you know, like impoverished because you kind of get into the Muslim community. And it's not, people are not engaged in that way. And they don't like if you come and you ask a lot of questions. It's not really a place where, you know, people are, I mean, it's like any religious space. I think they come and they pray and they want to do their thing. And, you know, it's not like a university where you start to ask questions, and it's not a welcoming space for converts oftentimes. So then I was like, okay, I have to meet this person. This is like, I have to see if he's teaching any classes. And turns out he lived 10 minutes from me because he was getting his PhD at Princeton, and we met, and then the rest is history. So that's how we met 30 years ago. And then his work has been just profoundly influenced. It was profound for me because when I met him, I thought, okay, this is really unusual, very different from what I'm used to. And I became very, you know, like dedicated. And I felt very grateful to God that this is, you know, an approach that I believe in, that saved my faith, that answered all kinds of questions for me about why Islam looks so crazy. And you know, like, I didn't get it. And then as I learned more and I understood more, I felt very empowered and very, you know, it's like the whole point of Islam is to bring people from darkness to light. And I had that experience. And it's really tied into education. And so that's why I've kind of dedicated my life to this. We started our nonprofit in 2017. And I feel like my way to pay back is to give in service to help people see, like, this is the journey that I took. This is the potential. This is what this message has to deliver to people. It's not a foreign message, but it's a very uplifting message to humanity. And, you know, so much of it is, it's for every person. Like you know, part and parcel of what we teach is, you know, God has given every single person a special gift. You have, you know, things that you're good at, things that you're not good at. You have a purpose, you have a mission, you know, and part of that is figuring out what is your gift, you know, what did God give you, and what can you use as a tool to make the world a better place? What can your contribution be? What is your legacy going to be? Because we're all going to die, and you know, it'd be nice to be able to look back and say, this is how I made the world a better place. And if we all work together, you know, like some people's strengths complement other people's weaknesses, you know, and the idea of like this sort of this human tapestry of like strength connecting with weakness, and when we come together and we build something beautiful, you know, that's very uplifting. And, you know, and also like kind of, you know, other questions that were important for me when I was searching for like, you know, meaning and faith is, you know, I have a lot of people that I love who are beautiful people who will never be Muslim. You know, there's nothing that I will ever say to them, and I wouldn't force them, you know, but where's their space? You know, if among Jews, if you're not a chosen person, you know, you're not a chosen person. In Christianity, if you don't choose Jesus, then your future is hell. And for Islam is the only faith that tells you there will be Jews, Christians, Muslims, all kinds of people in heaven. It's not your business, it's God's business. God is ultimately just, God is ultimately fair and merciful. God gives you actually more than you deserve. And it's not our place, but for me that was like an answer, like, okay, for my parents who will never be Muslim, I love them, they're beautiful, but there'll be a place for them because they'll be judged fairly on their own action. And that's the other thing that was really beautiful about Islam for me, is there's no concept of original sin where you're not paying back anybody else's sin. You're only held accountable for what you do, which to me was ultimately fair. And that that Islam connects to all the other monotheistic faiths because it's the same God, it's the same message, it's the same like outcome, and it's for humanity. Like the whole point is to uplift humanity. So I was looking for a universal message that would touch people because we're all human, right? And so it's not an exclusive club. It's not like, okay, this is my team, this is your team, and here's how we're different. No, this is something that is for all of us. And you don't have to be Muslim. That's not one of the main goals. It's not even what, God created a diverse world by design. And so the point is for us to come to know one another and to work with one another and to appreciate one another for our strengths and our differences and all that. So it's a really, really beautiful message, and then also just at a personal level, like my husband is like a brainiac, and there's some people who will never be, like even able to read. And so a religion has to be able to touch people at the very lowest rung and at the very highest level, and so the fact that I could see how my husband, like the more he knew, the more he felt like, I'm so ignorant, I know nothing, and that was very like, oh, okay. And then, people who will never read are like some of the most pious, beautiful, faithful people you'll ever meet. And so something in this message works for that whole broad range. And so that was, all of these things that, like once you sort of open your heart to searching for something beautiful and God hears your, and you build that relationship where you start interacting and talking to God, God sends you all kinds of signs if you're willing to believe that they're signs from God. A lot of times you get something happens to you and you're like, whoa, that meant something. And then you kind of go, no, I'm just imagining something. But no, these are, there are signs all around us for a loving, intelligent creator who is very interested in who you are, and that Islam believes in a very like engaged God who cares about you, who knows everything about you, and who wants the best for you, even if that means that you might be put through the paces, you have some tests, you have some challenges, but those things make you grow and make you stronger. And so ultimately the goal is, if you trust in this creator who loves you, that creator is trying to take you to a very beautiful place, and teach you stuff. And it becomes a very beautiful relationship if you want that. It's your choice. You don't have to, there's no coercion, meaning, we have free will. So you can choose to say, F you God, and I believe in Satan, that's your choice. And God's not going to chase you. But if you want God and you say, I want an elevated life and I want a beautiful life and I want to find my way to you, God will answer those prayers too. So that is a very fast summary of, I guess, my journey. There's so many stories, so many interesting things, but I turn it to you. Feel free to ask me any question. Nothing is off limits. And if I don't know, I'm just gonna say I don't know. But so I'm here at your disposal. I'll stay as long as you want, and cut me off whenever you guys have to go do something else. So the floor is yours. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone have any questions? Just feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to you.
So I know, sorry about the background music, the noise, they're making a lot of construction by me right now, but I know you mentioned about how Islamophobia is an industry, and I love how you mention it in that way, because it really is more than just a hate crime. It is funded by billions of people simply just to hate against Muslims. But sorry, I'm very passionate about this. And I know you mentioned that one of the ways to kind of alleviate this is through education, by educating people. But I was wondering, in your experience, if you can go more into detail about what are some ways that both Muslims and non-Muslims can foster a better understanding and dialogue to promote religious harmony and counter Islamophobia.
Absolutely. So, Islamophobia is a form of racism because what's happened is that people have basically said, they've racialized Muslims. So when you think of a Muslim, you think of a brown skinned person, you think of, there are all kinds of tropes. And it's kind of important to recognize it for what it is. And it's not, Muslims are like all over the world. So you will find Muslims in every shape, size, color, look. But that's not what you hear about. And so I think the first step is understanding what's going on. And there's plenty of resources out there, that even just the videos that you've watched and some of the things that you've read, to understand the dynamic of what's happening and how Muslims have been racialized. And I think that if you understand that in the context of racism, as this is one of the things that we as a community are fighting in general. And Muslims happen to be the low-hanging fruit. So imagine that all the Muslims are gone. Well, who's going to be next? It'll be the Jews, the Blacks, the Chinese, the whoever, it's a racial issue. And this is one of the scourges of our society that we have to fight. And so it's not one of the things about Islamophobia, or I guess one of the misconceptions is among Muslims, especially, is this is an issue that you don't know enough about Islam. Well, that's actually not true. I mean, a lot of people, who are working on this Islamophobia project have been around for a long time. They're some of the most educated people, like Daniel Pipes is one of the fathers of Islamophobia. He's an academic, he's a Jew, he's a Zionist. He's been around since, the 90s or, earlier. He has a whole history. They know exactly what Islam is about. That's not the issue. The issue is about power. It's about, Zionism for some people, it's about the whole Israeli-Palestine conflict. There's a lot of different reasons, but a lot of people come together, in this shared hatred. And so when it manifests as racism, the first thing is to call it out, right? And understand this is not an issue of religious education. It's not an issue of, ignorance. If you only knew how peaceful Islam is or how wonderful Muslims are, that somehow that would solve the problem. No, that's not it. There's a power dynamic involved. There's a money element involved. And like anything else, it's a lot of politicking. And so, the first step, as with anything else, is education. And if you even just follow the money, people have done a lot of studies to see who's profiting, who's doing stuff. And the thing that's really interesting now is that it's like the mask has come off. Like people don't even bother trying to hide it anymore. So if you do a little bit of digging, it's not hard to figure out, what Islamophobia is. Even if you go to like a place like, Southern Poverty Law Center, right, which is a really great resource for all kinds of hate crimes. They do a really good job of, identifying what is Islamophobia and break it down for you. And why, people are so successful at it. It gets hidden. I mean, it gets presented in many different ways, but when you remove all of that, filter, it's not hard to see that it's just, people are using these tropes to instill fear. There's another great website called Fear Inc., where I think it's a little bit older, but they followed the money. And, there's so many other examples. I think the article that you guys, the New Yorker article about Hazm, called Dirty Secrets of a Smear Campaign. This is like things have gotten very, very sophisticated, where, there's a lot of money to be gained and a lot of power that, could potentially be lost. Like, okay, here's another example, like Saudi Arabia controls two of the holy sites in Mecca and Medina. And, and this is not how it was meant to be originally. It used to be that Muslim countries together had to, take care of the space, but, through colonialism and British intervention and the Saudi family became in charge of these two holy sites. And they have systematically destroyed so many holy sites. They've done everything in their power to kind of kill Islam from the inside. And yet Muslims are kind of in this space where they still think that they should go to pilgrimage. Like we're kind of a radical group in the sense that we're saying, money that you spend to go to Saudi Arabia is money that's getting spent on, supporting the war, killing people, killing children in Yemen, supporting the complicity in the Uyghur concentration camps. Saudis make a ton of money from oil, but they also make a ton of money from Muslims around the world going to the holy sites. And Muslims feel that this is, one of the pillars of Islam. But if they knew in their own tradition, there were other times in history when jurists, the learned people, called for Muslims not to go because the people that were in charge were handling their responsibilities so unjustly. So when you start tracking all the things that the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates, they do, quote unquote, in the name of Islam, they are destroying Muslims from the inside. And if we were really an educated, empowered people, we have enough money. Muslims do well, but they're not inclined to invest in social justice causes. So this is oftentimes we're sort of the lone voice saying, you got to stand up for justice. People have to sacrifice. Look at what other people, other religions, other ideologies are investing. Like even just in our country, right? Like the white nationalist groups or Christian evangelists, they will spend billions of dollars because they believe in an ideological cause. And, there are people that work 24/7 just to malign Islam. And then on the flip side, what do Muslims spend to counter that narrative? It's like nothing, absolutely nothing. But who will ultimately suffer? Well, Muslims first, but then after that, as I said, low-hanging fruit, and then who's going to be next in line? It's all part of the same structure of, racism and, white supremacy and, elite, the whole power of the elite. It's all the same stuff that we're all, just tired and disgusted with, right? Like the billionaires just get richer and richer. They control more and more of the world. And here we are, the rest of the world, suffering at their hands so they can enjoy their elite privileges while everyone else, people don't have enough money to eat. Yeah, it's just a really, really dark picture. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I think part of it is it's sort of an education of our global situation. And the more you invest and you connect the dots, you see that this isn't just about Islamophobia. It's about a lot more than that. So did that answer your question?
Yes, it definitely did. Thank you.
And along those lines too, I think to fight back, we have to create alliances, right? And you're not going to have a lot of people who come together, on necessarily the same, belief system, but you have to believe in something bigger. There has to be a space for all of humanity, and there has to be love and compassion and acceptance. And so if you have enough people on that side, it's kind of like the Bernie Sanders message, right? You've got this populist, you got the people, and you've got people's rights, and you've got, the vast majority of the world, and then you've got this 1%. And who's in charge? What do they control? It's an uprising that needs to happen. So it's, yeah, part of the challenge moving forward for everyone, especially, people in your generation, is understanding the world and fighting back and being active about it, not being complacent and thinking that it just has to be this way because that's how it's always been. No, one person can make a difference. And I'm very much a believer in one person with God can do anything, because you have so many examples in our world of just, one person. If they didn't do what they were doing, this massive change wouldn't have happened. And if you're doing something for the greater good, you're serving, for God, then you have God's help, and God can do anything, God may choose not to help something, for some reason we don't understand. But our job is, I believe, in this very dark world where it's really easy to just get so depressed and you feel like, oh, how are we going to change anything? I believe that you just do what you can do, whatever with whatever gift God gave you, you just try. And you have no idea what it will lead to, but if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. And that's one of the really powerful like learnings that I got from just even starting this nonprofit, like in 2017. I mean, it was kind of an extension of the work we've been doing. You know, my husband had written a lot of books and he was lecturing and all that stuff, but things just gotten so dark and so Islamophobic. We were like, we just have to do something more. So we created, you know, this entity, and we thought, okay, maybe we can do some fundraising. And we didn't have really any idea or any plan. We're just like, okay, it's just an opportunity for people to come together. We can talk, we can educate. Um, and then over time, then we started doing, you know, like the Quran Project, where my husband, you know, was not intending to share with the world what he had discovered about the Quran. And just through a bunch of different events, he got convinced that, okay, maybe I do need to share what I know. And once he started sharing it, people were blown away because it was just so like life transforming. And then we just, one thing led to another. And then pretty soon, you know, we have all these videos on our YouTube channel. And like people are writing letters like, oh my gosh, you've changed, you know, my life and everything that, you know, you've reconnected me with my faith. And, you know, and for us, like I was saying to Professor Ramadan yesterday, I'm like, well, we're just sitting here. Okay, fine. We have a camera in front of us and we record and we upload, you know, and it's like no expectation of anything. And then you start getting stories from people like, you know, a woman in Pakistan, she's a university student, 21 years old. She writes me and she's like, I'm sitting here, I'm watching you, and I don't, you know, like you're a role model for me because I don't see any women who are like you around me where I live. And, you know, please keep doing what you're doing. That just like completely floored me. Then recently we got a letter from a couple in Chile, and because we finished our project, and I said, can, you know, if you guys have time, you know, write a thank you letter for Sheikh so he knows how this learning affected you. So someone wrote and said, it completely changed my life. I'm in Chile. I was trying to get married and I met this woman and who was interested in Islam. We started meeting for dates. We would watch your videos and then we would start discussing them. And from discussing your videos, we got to know each other and we fell in love. And now we're getting married in November, and you know, and she's converting. And so I was like, what? You know, how in the world, you know, someone in Chile, you know, and then we get messages from just everywhere in the world, and you're like, holy cow. And then you think, okay, but if we hadn't done it, you know, if Usuli didn't exist, right? I mean, like for me, it would be a really sad place. And I think for a lot of people who write to us, it would be like, okay, you know, they write us saying, you know, this is when we watch you, we feel like we're coming home. We feel like this is the voice of reason. This is, you know, where things make sense. No one else is saying this kind of stuff. So if we didn't do it, then it wouldn't exist, you know, and Muslim organizations, by and large, are, you know, infected by a lot of Islamophobia. So they can't say a lot of things that we like to talk about. And we're not funded by any government. We're not, you know, so we don't have any interest in it. We're not willing to take money from anyone. So we were able to say whatever we want to say. And so I really try to encourage people, you know, whatever you feel passionate about, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's animal rights, whether it's, you know, whatever. But you should just take it with both hands and run with it and change the world and feel empowered. And that's how you make a difference. So any other questions? Please. Okay, let me see what your name is. Zoe.
You mentioned kind of at the beginning of your answer to the last question, kind of like the scheme with which and like the tropes of like Muslims and Muslim Americans and like how racialization is kind of played out to paint Muslims as like majority like brown people from like Muslim majority countries. In your experience as a person who doesn't necessarily fit that trope, like what does that look like in your experience? Like how do you experience that?
I mean, you know, and I'll give you the example, like when 9/11 happened, it was a really shocking time for all Muslims because they knew like I remember the morning very clearly. You know, it's like one of these things where people like, where were you when X happened? And people can always remember like, okay, where were you when you first heard about 9/11 and the towers crashing? And I remember I was home and my husband was asleep and I woke him up and I'm like, okay, you're not gonna like this. And the first thought is always, oh my God, you know, please don't let it be Muslims, right? And then we find out that, oh crap, it was Muslims. And then so my husband woke up and then, you know, of course you're panicking because your child is in school and you're wondering, oh my God, are they going to give your child a hard time? And then you start worrying about your own safety, you know. And I felt at that point, okay, so my husband looks Arab and my child looks Arab, right? And I don't. So I fly under the radar. And it's a little bit unfair, because it's like, just because I look different, I'm like, okay, thank God I don't have to deal with that. Well, now I do, I guess, because there's a lot of anti-Asian, hatred. But, like, this is, I think, where it's the proof of racism, right? Because when you say Muslim, you don't think of someone who looks like me. You think about someone who looks more like you, or a woman in a scarf. And it's like, okay. And then like place on top of that, all the different things you could say, like, well, why do women have to wear scarves? Why do you force your women to wear bags? Right. This is kind of like all the ugly stuff that people throw at you. Oh, so you talk about liberating women, but you force them to wear, like this clothing. And then it gets like really like just ridiculous, where you hear these stories of women who in France that want to go to the beach and they want to cover up. And then that's like a crime, So, okay. So you can wear a 2-piece bikini that shows every bit of your body, and that's okay, but you want to be a little bit modest, and now it's a crime. And then you take it to the other extreme now in a lot of countries like Sweden or, Norway or whatever, like France. These are like grounds for removal of children, right? So if someone comes in and says, oh, you've told your child that they're not allowed to date, you've told your child that you have to wear a scarf, you've told your child that, premarital sex is wrong. Well, guess what? That's grounds for removal. And this happens every single day. So Muslim families are losing their children. But that doesn't happen to Christian families who want to raise their children with pure values, right? Like in Christianity, it's like a big thing now. Okay, abstinence, right? Let me wear my ring. I'm saving myself for marriage, and that's what we're trying to teach our kids too. It's like, okay, I have an 18-year-old son, and I, talk to him about how it's really important that, like, think about how beautiful if you marry someone that you, on your wedding night, you give them the gift that you've never shared with anyone else. You give them, an intimate experience. No one else has seen your body, whatever. That's a really beautiful thing. And even to think, okay, what if your wife says, I've never been with a man and I've been waiting for you? I mean, that's such a beautiful thing, right? But that's grounds for removing children from Muslim families, but not for Christians, not for Jews, not for Hindus, not for anyone else. So that's, an example of Islamophobia. But, so to answer your question, I mean, that's how I experience it. It's like, I see it's a racial, it's racist. If you look in the news, everyone who's presented as a Muslim looks kind of the same, right? And that's why even people who are Sikhs, who are brown skinned, get mistaken for Muslims and they get killed. But what about all the Muslims that are in Indonesia, Malaysia, China, that they don't look like, or Sudan, or, you wouldn't know if they're Muslim. But those things, obviously if you're like African American and you're in Sudan, now you've got issues of being African American, right? And so then it's a different issue. But again, it's the scourge of society. It's the whole idea of racism and, playing off, people forgetting that, we're all human beings. We all have dreams. We all have, fears and desires, and we want children, we want families, we want a stable life, we want to, be able to live a normal life. I mean, why should anyone else be less entitled just because they don't look white or they don't look, Western, whatever that means. So, yeah, I mean, it's the same problem that all of us face,
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? I mean, I'd love to hear from you guys too. Like, why are you signed up for this class? What did you want to know about Islam? And thank you for watching my very cringy introductions. Like, how did you react to it? What were, what questions did that raise with you?
Hi, I'm Hiba. So I was born Muslim and I'm a practicing Muslim right now. And I don't think I've ever seen a class. I mean, even when I was a kid, like, I think the only time we learned about Islam was for like 1 week in a history class. And it was just talking about Mecca and this place that people go to, nothing more in detail. And I remember just kids would just joke around about it and have such racist jokes to say about it. So in college, obviously, when I got the chance to learn about Islam in a more professional setting, I signed up for the class as fast as I possibly could, because it's very interesting to learn about your own religion, especially a religion that a lot of people have misconceptions about, like you said. So that's kind of why I'm taking this class. And for your journey in your video, it was really interesting. And I really liked hearing your perspective of things, especially as a woman who doesn't necessarily look Muslim. My interviewee, he's an imam who's from West Africa. So once again, he doesn't look Muslim unless if he has his kufi on or he's with his who wears the hijab. And so it was just really interesting because he was born Muslim, and his story is about how he's reconnecting with his faith, which is I feel like a journey that a lot of Muslims have. And you said how you once felt empty when you were at Cornell, and he felt the same exact way. So it's just really interesting to see the stories collide, not just his story with yours, but with many more that I've seen and heard from. So
I mean, I think every person at some point reaches that point where, you start wondering, like, okay, well, why am I here? Like, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And is it just about, for me, it was just like, okay, is this just about like, making as much money as possible, getting the best job, and there used to be an expression like whoever dies with the most toys wins, right? And I don't know if that ages me, but, it's like, you start wondering, what's the point, right? And it can show up in a lot of different ways. It can be, depression. It can be like just apathy, sense of like, well, I don't know who I am, right? And so such an important part of like everyone's journey has to be, well, who am I? And what do I care about? What's important to me? What do I stand for? And separating you from even just your upbringing in a sense, because it's important, like you are so influenced obviously by your parents or how you were raised or where you were raised, but at some point, and especially when you get to college, and like for me, when I really got into studying Islam, I was away from my family, which was actually a gift. They were in California and I was in New York, and as for all that my parents were scared or whatever, I was free to do what I wanted. And so that was an opportunity to really explore, who am I, and what's important to me, and what do I stand for, and do I really believe what I was raised with, and is that the life that I want? Because you can choose whatever life you want. And that was a surprise to me, even like after I converted, because I had so much baggage from how I was raised that a lot of times you kind of have to undo that baggage, and it's an active engagement. Sometimes it's hard because when you start questioning, like, well, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I think this? Is this because my parents taught me that, or because I actually really believe that? And so it's an education process. And then once you kind of start recognizing, like, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't actually think that. Maybe I actually, maybe I'm racist because my parents were racist, which was actually the truth for me too. I felt like my parents were racist. And so there was a period where I had to undo that. And I had to teach myself, no, every person has a right. You don't get to choose where you're born. You don't get to choose what you look like, and so why is it that why should you be treated any other way than with respect and dignity? Everyone has, a right to dignity. And then putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So why, okay, if that were me, how would I want to be treated? How would I feel about that? And that was an education for me too, because you grow up thinking in very narcissistic terms, right? You start as a baby, the only thing you're worried about is what you want. But part of maturing is recognizing that there are other people around you, and other people have rights, and that how you treat people also affects how they'll treat you and how they'll think of you. And, so this is a part of the growing, part of the maturing. But what was really empowering and very liberating is when you actually come to the, conclusion that I can choose what life I want. And so choose wisely, and how do you invest your time? How do you spend your time? Because that also influences who you are, right? So people like say, okay, if you look at the 5 people around you who you spend the most time with and take an average, that's who you are. Well, yeah. So, it does matter who your friends are. It does matter what you surround yourself with, how you occupy your time, what you read, what you don't read, how much time you're on social media, all of that stuff is an investment in who you are and in your soul. And you know that a lot of things can have a very negative impact on your soul. And so if you choose to surround yourself with things that are actually good for your soul and feed you, and surround yourself with people who are positive instead of negative, or people who are interested in elevating, being better, serving others, versus people who want to sit and be victims and complain about, all the ways that life treated them wrong, that all affects you. And so you have the ability to say, no, I want to be, I want to be smart, I want to be good, I want to be positive, I want to be, active, and then do it. It's like no one stops you except you. Anybody else that I'm curious to know, anybody else, why are you taking this class? What did you want to know? There's one of the things we always say is there's no embarrassment in religion. So nothing is off limits, because you should care, this is the most important thing. You should feel free to ask anything. If it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, then there's a problem, right? So, okay, Jackson.
For me, I took this class because I don't know anything about like any religions really. And especially like the history aspect of it. Because this class is like has a lot of history, um, and like current stuff as well. But I think it's just interesting to learn about religion, but its aspect not just in like like going to mosque or going to church and praying, but it's like all of the other aspects that like come along with it. I thought that was, I mean, that's what we're learning, and that's why it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like one of the things I always talk about is, the most important thing is building a relationship with God, and it just starts as a habit of like talking to God, and I don't know why, I think the hardest thing is if you're not sure, making kind of like that jump from not believing in a faith to, or not believing in God to believing in God. Because for some reason, from the time I was little, I actually always believed in God. So that wasn't a challenge for me. But what was a challenge for me was when I had a son, and I was like, okay, how am I going to teach him about God? How am I going to talk to him about God? And as a convert, it's like, okay, well, you come at everything through like the lens of questioning, like why, all that stuff. So kids are the same way. And I wanted to really emphasize with him sort of like, okay, well, God is always with us. I mean, God is just here in the room. And God is not like super far away looking at you and judging you, like, like from fear, right? So you have to be scared that if you do something wrong, you're going to hell, which is how a lot of Muslims are raised. But more like you're never alone. This is someone, God loves you. In fact, in our tradition, loves you more than your own mother loves you. And that if you're ever scared, if you're ever anxious, even if you're excited or happy, you can just turn and talk to God, because God can hear you and God is with you. So the idea, even for a child, like, you're never alone, you're with a very positive force, is something very comforting. And also to be like, it's like any relationship, the more you invest in it, the more you gain from it, right? So a lot of times you don't even need, like, this is also the fascination of, okay, so for people who never knew how to read or never had an access to education, but they're very close to God, well, why is that? It's because they invested in a relationship, whether it was through talking, through praying, through just, witnessing the world. Like we also talk about, okay, the Quran is our holy book, it's our text, but you have the Quran of creation. It's like everything around you, nature, animals, whatever that God created, that are all also, like the text, evidence of a creator. And you see how beautiful the world is and how intricate it is and how it's sophisticated in its design, especially if you're a scientist or you're a doctor. You see how everything has to work so perfectly and with such precision, or things can go wrong. This is all proof of intelligent design. So it's not even, like, so when you say, religion has such a bad name now, and even like no one can really say God without feeling, like judged or something. But it's so much about like, how you exist in the world, It's beyond, you know, like, so religion I feel is like a very limiting term, right? But it's kind of like your existence, your soul, your connection to the world, your connection to a higher power, um, you know, and then ultimately the question obviously of like, okay, well, what's going to happen when I die, right? Where do I go? What happens? That was also, I think, what I was also very interested in when I was in my faith journey too. Um, because if you feel like, you know, some people will just say, well, there's no way to know, so why should we even bother trying? Well, that's not true. Actually, if you invest in learning, you know, the Islamic message is that there's accountability. So you will be held responsible for everything that you do, good and bad. You know, so everything you do that's good, you actually will be rewarded for. And, you know, and even like if you imagine you do one act of kindness and it leads to, you know, like a multiplicity of kindnesses, right? You're nice to someone and they turn around, they're nice to someone, you know, these stories of like just how goodness spreads. Well, that actually is something you're rewarded for also. But on the flip side, you know, also negativity and sin. And, you know, if you're like a, you know, negative person and your negativity spreads to other people and then their negativity goes, I mean, you know, it's like you think about the whole matrix of things that could happen, but, you know, you're responsible for what you contribute, what you do. Um, and that's, you know, and that's beautiful. And then on the final day, you know, when you meet your maker, um, you know, there's an accounting. And so that's why when you have evil people, you know, even if you don't see justice in this world, you know, justice will take place. I mean, this is kind of like the equation of justice. You know, it's like everything is, God is keeping track of everything. And don't you worry, you know, for all the suffering you see, it will be accounted for, you know. And so it's like, maybe I won't see it in my time, but God sees it and it's not going to go unanswered. And so, you know, it's just, it gives you a lot of peace and a lot of understanding when you know that there are answers to things, you know, that help make the world make sense and help make your existence make sense. Because if you're just kind of floating and you don't really know what's the point, or, you know, what is this all going to lead to? Is it all going to just be dark after we're done? I mean, that creates its own level of anxiety. And a lot of it is just, you know, if you invest in the learning, you will discover that there are answers, you know. I mean, so education again is the key to so much. And I think ultimately what we all want as human beings is a measure of peace, right? You know, it doesn't mean that everything has to be happy, because it's not, you know, life is not always going to be happy. But I think if you are at peace with like who you are, your place in the world, you understand, you know, like the what your creator has told you is like, you just do your best, you know, and certain things you just leave to God and justice will be addressed. um you know, and then you can be like, okay, I'm at peace with who I am, what I'm doing, the people around me, this, you know, what's happening in the world. I can't, you know, the world is very unjust, but this world is not for justice, it's for me just doing the best that I can with what I have. That brings you a lot of peace and understanding. And I think that's what a lot of people are searching for, at least in my experience. That's what I was searching for. And I found that, you know, Islam, you know, sometimes you're looking for stuff and it's the answers are in the place where you would least expect to find it. Like I never thought I would find it, you know, as a Muslim in Islam. It's like, oh, wait, you're crazy. But now I feel like so grateful. And, you know, and especially like what we've done in the last 3 years with, you know, really digging deep into the Quran. It's been so clarifying and so life transforming, because it answers so many questions about human beings, you know, like people 1400 years ago were doing the same stuff they're doing today, you know, like the people in power, the people who don't care about the underclass, they just want what they want, they're arrogant, they're narcissistic, you know, they're working the system, and they don't believe in ethics, they just believe in opportunism. You know, all the stuff that you're learning that we covered in our journey with the Quran, we're like, oh my God, yeah, this is speaking to us today. Like this is speaking to the 1% that is in, you know, hoarding all the wealth and not caring about the rest of the world. And what are we supposed to do about it? It gives us answers too. You know, you got to believe in justice, you got to believe in the power, you know, of goodness, and you have to check yourself, and you have to be active and not apathetic, and remember God can change everything in an instant. there's a higher power, there's, something that everyone has to answer to. So, anyway, sorry, long-winded response, but thank you for your comment. How are we doing on time? I'm sorry, I've been
Oh,
talking.
no, that's four. No, totally. Naomi, I think, has a question.
Okay, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Naomi. Sorry. I just wanted to add on to what Jackson was saying. My reasoning for joining this class. I think coming from a place that was oh sorry. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. I didn't really grow up learning anything about Islam at all. I was I was taught certain propaganda that was very Islamophobic, and I think that was really what made me want to take the class, because I knew it couldn't be true. I don't know. And my sister actually has a super similar story to yours. She my older sister, she got involved with the religion, and then through it she met her current fiance, and now they're together practicing, and they're raising their son to be like that, or to also practice Islam. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's super interesting, and I think that we're so lucky that we get to be taught this by someone who's so active and doing research in the field. And I think it's really cool too that we're getting to contextualize everything. We're not just learning about the religion, but we're learning about its place in history and how it's changed and how it's affected, how it's been affected. And yeah, it's my little spiel.
That's great. I mean, it's so important because, the key to so much of this is humanization, right? We all lose when people can stereotype and, put people in boxes. And the only way to answer that is to break out of those boxes and share human stories. So, I try to bring, when I'm giving my introductions or whatever, I try to tell a lot of stories to humanize people. And, and I think that a lot of the answer for Muslims is to share their stories too, but to share them in a way that is relatable, right? So, the book that we just came out with called The Prophet's Pulpit, we actually just came out with our second volume. It's a collection of sermons that were given here, but turned into really, powerful essays. And we were very intentional about how we talked about God, for example. We wouldn't say Allah, we would say God, because even the use of the word Allah, Islamophobes love to go, oh, see, Muslims worship this weird God called Allah. Well, Allah is just the Arabic word for God, and Christians in Arabic speaking countries use Allah to refer to God, but they don't tell you that. They let you think that, oh, see, Muslims are so weird because they believe in Allah. But so we were really intentional about writing a book that was very inclusive. And, if we used Arabic words, we would immediately, translate them either in line or, have a glossary. But, to share this message that this is a humanistic message, this is about human beings, and everything in our world is about human beings, and ultimately, what are people's rights, and, what does it mean for a human being to have dignity, and what comes with dignity. And, there's so many forces in the world that want to strip you of your dignity and do it in a way that you don't even realize that you're getting stripped of your dignity. And so one of the really important ways to fight back is to insist on your dignity and understand, what does that mean? And what does that entail? And, again, kind of, in our tradition, we say that if you want to know God, you start by knowing yourself. And it's a really important part of anyone's journey to, again, do that kind of very self-reflective, look okay, who am I? What am I good at? What am I not good at? What do I like? What am I passionate about? And if you don't know, it's okay, because it's always shifting too, especially as as you grow and you evolve and you have life experiences, you learn more and you see what you're good at and all that stuff. And and especially when you go through really difficult experiences, you also see what you're capable of. Some of the most important growth periods of my life were when I, was going through the worst hardships. I talked about how, when I was Muslim and when I converted, my parents and my mom in particular, I was an only child and she thought I was joining a cult. And so she went to the extreme of contacting cult intervention groups. Literally, I was 27, 28. And she was talking to people about kidnapping me and deprogramming me because I had joined, a religion that she thought was, so extreme. I mean, thankfully now, 35 years later, she realizes that, okay, that wasn't the case. And actually, that my family, well, so the point is that led to me being separated from like cutting relations with my family for 8 years because they just so badly, like wanted to extract me from my belief system. And for me, it was like, no, I'm not, I know what I've chosen and I'm not turning back. And I don't care that you don't like it. Um, and I feel strongly enough that like at the time I thought I would not see my parents again until the final day. And I was prepared to do that, although it was extremely difficult. But now looking back, it was like the best thing. It was so difficult, but it was the most important experience I had because it allowed me a separation from my family so I could grow and I could discover what was important to me at the time and remove like a lot of this negativity. And then, when the time came, thank God, we had the opportunity to reconnect and over the years, mend our relationship into now where it's miraculous. It's like we have very good relationship and my parents are proud of what we do. They're huge supporters, and they see that what we're doing is something very important. And so that, you never know, right? It's a journey. And, especially when you are doing it, you're taking this journey with God. I mean, God knew what was going on. God knew what I needed and God facilitated that. And then, like you see the miraculous change and we end up in a very good place. And, me being stronger, my parents actually becoming, religious, like they started going to church, and whereas before their God was money. And, so you never really quite know what life has in store for you or God has in store for you. But you wanna place your bets on the good team with God, not with the other side. So yeah.
I had a quick question. I guess you did talk a little about, not being visibly Muslim, and a lot of reverts like you've read about, sometimes there's the pressure to wear like religious symbols to like look Muslim and be accepted as such, or change their name. So I guess if you could tell us more a little about kind of like what it's meant for you to not have any of these like markers, and being like racialized Muslim, and more about, coming from like, a Taiwanese family and just being an Asian convert, like how has that affected your experience?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, like when you convert, a lot of times people come out of the woodwork and start telling you all kinds of things about all the things you have to do now. So now you have to wear a scarf. Now you have to change your name. Now you have to have a Muslim name. Now you have to blah, 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 blah. And usually when you're a convert, you don't know anything and you trust people or you just, everything's new. So you have no idea. I really resisted the hijab issue because to me, like in my reading, the issue was modesty, not scarf. And it was illogical to me. I would get in debates with people. I'm like, are you saying that, okay, let's say you have a set of twins, right? A man and a woman, they both have short hair. They look basically the same. You can't necessarily tell them apart. And you're saying that the woman, if she doesn't cover, she's not being modest, even though, like, let's say they're all both wearing raincoats. And I would get into these debates with people and they'd be like, yes, because women have this sexual aura around them and they need to be covered. I was like, that's BS, and I didn't buy it because one, I didn't have any kind of cultural attachment to the scarf. I didn't grow up obviously around Muslims or anything like that. And for me, the question of modesty was like, okay, I'm not going to wear really revealing clothes, right? I'm not going to sexualize myself. I'm not going to put myself forward as, an object of desire, but that doesn't mean that I can't, it doesn't mean I have to wear a scarf. And then also because I believe that Islam is a message for all of humanity. If I believe that truly, then I believe that what God is saying is every single woman on the planet would be better if they all wore scarves, which to me is ludicrous. So the issue to me became an issue of modesty, and modesty not just in your dress, but also in your behavior. So that's just one example. As far as the name, you know, no one has more names than me. I have a whole story to tell of my names. So I started Grace Song, and then I decided, okay, when I got married, I became Grace Song Abul Fadl. So my husband's call it Abul Fadl. And then I wanted a Muslim name, not because I felt like I had to, but I also wanted to honor my mother-in-law. So I took the name Anmar, which means tiger, because my mother-in-law was El Nimr. Her last name was El Nimr, which means the tigers. And I feel like, you know, my husband would tease me about my spirit of a tiger and kind of get in fights with people and whatever. No, I mean, that's not true, but I'm actually, you know, could be pretty like assertive about things. And then my parents, I had reaction to my parents. They had such a strong reaction, you know, and they even told me, don't change your name, you need to stay as Song. And so I removed Song at one point. So Song is actually my maiden name, but it's not one of my legal names now. And I go by Grace Song. I mean, and so there was also part of a reflection of my journey too, because, you know, I wanted to kind of grow as a Muslim. So then there are people in the world that knew me as Anmar at that time, because I really wanted to change from Grace to Anmar. And it was funny because people would call me Anmar and I wasn't used to my name, so I wouldn't respond. And then I switched back, you know, and then like different parts of like people in California knew me as Grace. And then it became a student also of like reclaiming, you know, my name, Grace Song, as who I was before I became Muslim, because I made a lot of bad choices and the things that I did that I'm ashamed of. But now I can actually go back and say, you know, that was part of my journey and I am who I am. And I'm proud of, you know, like everything that I had to go through to get to where I am today. So I'm okay, you know. But, you know, this as a convert, by definition, and I wouldn't even say just as a convert, but I think as someone who is dedicated and wants to take the path of ethics and beauty and light and, you know, have a certain conviction, it's a very lonely path just by definition. If you're a convert, or number one in the Muslim community, they don't really quite know what to do with you, because on the one hand, they're like, oh, wow, you know, thank God you were chosen by God to be a convert. That's so amazing. You know, you're so special. And then they don't really quite know what to do with you. So then they kind of ignore you. And that's a pretty typical convert experience. And so a lot of converts end up leaving because they don't find, they want community and they don't find community, because right now the Muslim space is really like culturally and ethnically oriented. Like most mosques are cultural centers. They're not necessarily places of faith. And as evidence for that, I say, you know, you will find there's the Arab mosque, there's the Turkish mosque, there's the Pakistani mosque. You know, they're organized more by culture. If you were to walk into an Islamic mosque, ideally, you should walk in regardless of what you look like, regardless of who you are, you would be welcomed equally and you would not feel excluded. But that is not the situation. And it's largely because Muslims are an immigrant population right now. And they, you know, they're more concerned about, you know, like survival, as most immigrants are, you know, when they come to this country. So they don't have the time and the luxury to start thinking about, you know, higher elevation things. And they're also under attack. And so it's remained a very cultural and ethnic thing. And I think that, so, but to my point about loneliness, you know, maybe you know this by now, maybe you'll come to learn this as you get older and you meet people. There are people who just, you know, you never quite feel like you fit in because you're not interested in doing what the mainstream does, you know, and you might, and even as an educated person, you know, you're going to question more often than someone who's not educated. And you start, like, it's almost like the more you know, the more you kind of start breaking away from the pack. And part of, I think, empowerment and enlightenment also comes loneliness, because now you've decided to choose a path that is not the norm. It's not what people think is normally acceptable. And so part of choosing that, and even like think about it, you know, like you will come across a situation where you have an ethical question, right? And like maybe 90% of the people will say, no, just go with the flow, do whatever, you know, everyone else does. And then you've got like a very small population that goes, no, we got to do what's right. And so many stories of the people that want to do what's right, and they lose their friends, they lose their support, they lose their community, whatever, but they're committed to the principle of doing what's right. And that's a, that's a hard road, but to me, it's the right road, because principles and ethics matter. And that's like, if you believe in this message of, of Islam, which is like, you have to always choose the elevated ethics. You can't just be good, you have to be beautifully good. You have to be a moral example for others. Well, now you've really, taken the bar and you've like put it up there. And a lot of people don't want that path because it's hard. It's hard to go against the grain. It's hard to make ethical decisions, especially when you have things to lose. So it becomes like a choice, like a personal choice. Like, do you want this life? Do you want the life? And to me, it's like, well, yeah, because we're all going to die. And on the final day, like the Muslims believe like this life is a test. And what happens to you in the next life, which is the true life to come, depends on how you act in this life. So if you are ethical, you're good, you're beautiful, and not to say you're perfect, because human beings just by definition are not perfect. But if you, your intention is, I'm going to try and be the best human being I can be. And God knows what's in your heart. God knows, everything. God knows whatever situation you were in, the choices you made, what choices you didn't make, what your potential was, whether you lived up to that potential, whether you tried, whether you didn't try. It's like, you don't even have to explain, like God already knows. It matters, in my perspective, it matters what choices you make, and you should make those choices wisely. But that means that then you're probably not going to be popular. You're probably not going to have a bunch of friends. You probably have a lot of people that will betray you at some point because they're not on that same train as you are. And you just have to be okay with that, because you're choosing the principle. You're choosing, like a different path. And a lot of people don't have the bravery to do that. They don't have the conviction, or they don't have the knowledge or the desire. I mean, some people just want to have a nice, easy life. And, I just want what I want. I just want my family. I just want my friends. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to think about politics. I don't want to think about, I don't want to give away money. I don't want to donate. I don't want to give my time. I don't want to blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. It's your choice. But, if you don't, then there's limitations to that. And the more you do, I believe the more God will reward you in this life and also in the hereafter. And that's a blessed life. It's meaningful. It's substantive. It matters. You can make change in people's lives, in the world. To me, like, otherwise, what's the point of living? Otherwise, it's just an ego fest, right? You're just looking for, oh, what food tastes the best? What car looks the nicest? What can I do for me, 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 me? That's fine, but it gets old, and it's very boring, and it's not very elevated. I don't know if that answered your question. I kind of went all over the place.
Yeah, I guess just the last part of like kind of like being an Asian American Muslim. I guess how has that a good convert? How has that affected your experience?
I mean, I think people are just surprised that I'm Muslim, and I guess I enjoy that, because then I can talk about it. I mean, so part of like okay, so part of my journey when I was trying to figure out, like, okay, who am I? When I was growing up, my mom gave me kind of a complex about other Asians. And so I didn't ever really want to be around Asians. And I went to Berkeley, so there's like a gazillion Asians there, and I like stayed away from them. So when I tried to figure out, okay, well, who am I? And I thought, well, maybe I should give Asians a chance. So I went through there where I'm like, okay, now I want to go hang around with Asians. And then, so I met a nice group of Asians, and they were super nice, but I felt like I was just hanging out with my family, like my parents and their friends again, because we would just talk about, food we ate, places we did, talk about our parents, talk about, Asian families. And no one was interested in talking about sort of like higher level, like, okay, well, what happens when we die? What is the meaning of life? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. So I had kind of that same thing. I'm like, okay, well, so this is really not an ethnic issue. This is really an issue of wanting to find people who share the same kind of outlook or curiosities that I do. So that kind of, I guess it put it into perspective. And then maybe another way of answering that question is, okay, so my husband is, Egyptian, right? And two more unlikely people should never have come together. It's only from God that we found our way to one another, because we're so different. I mean, he's so bookish. He's really shy in some ways, but then he's like, this big academic. And you know, he's just all about books. And for him, heaven would be like the most beautiful big library, you know, you can imagine. That's not my conception of heaven, you know. And you know, and so this is actually one of the things that we talked about, which is interesting in the Quran, like in Surah Rahman. You know, one of the things is like heaven can be as personal and individual as each individual. So, you know, and which is makes sense to you, you know, like you want paradise to be what you think of paradise would be, and why not, you know? But where we, you know, and so where we come together is honestly on faith and belief and service and conviction about life and the purpose of life. You know, we like different foods, we like different music, we like doing different things with our, you know, our free time. But all of that stuff, you know, falls to the side. Like, you know, you could very easily be like, okay, our marriage is about how do we find the common ground between an Egyptian and a Chinese? That keeps it as a very mundane, like of this world kind of marriage. Or you can make it a marriage about something greater than both of you. And, you know, yeah, sure, food is nice, you know, culture, you know, whatever. But what really matters is values and service and conviction about why we're here and what can we do to improve. And that's why, like, you can have two very different people come together for a higher purpose. So I don't know if that really answers the question either. So it's kind of like, it puts it into perspective. It doesn't matter so much your race or your externals. What matters is what you're made of. What's your character? What do you stand for? You know, what are you going to contribute? And that's why I think, like, even the idea of having a very lonely path, it's not that lonely when you're very busy with trying to do things that you care about, that matter, you know, that are consequential, and that you feel like you're serving God and God is your partner and you're trying to, you know, it's a meaningful life in that way. So, you know, people can be very hurtful, they can be very disappointing, they can be wonderful, you know, and people, that's people. But, you know, but none of them are like, you know, perfect beauty, perfect justice, perfect love, but God is, you know. And so it's kind of exciting when you can, you know, befriend God and ask God to help you, you know, achieve your full potential, whatever that is. And then you feel like peace when you pray because you feel a connection. And that's stuff that comes with an investment of time and investing in the relationship, investing in, you know, prayer or whatever. So like even the whole idea of like 5 prayers a day, it's not for the ritual, it's not for the prayer, it's a means to an end. It's a means to connect, you know, with the creator who loves you. And it's not even, and to me, like a lot of the connection is just like, you know, just talking through your day, like something happened to you. And it's like, God, did you just see that? Can you believe that person just said that to me? You know, and of course you don't have to say it because of course God saw it, you know, and you're like complaining to God, like, I can't believe that this person is just, oh my God. And, but that feeling of like, you're never alone. You're seen, you're heard, you're understood without even saying a word. That's peace, that's beauty, that's power, you know? So.
Thanks for sharing. We have time for one more question. Does anyone have anything else to ask or share?
Anything is fine. There's no embarrassment in religion. You can ask. You know, give me a zinger. Okay, yes, Diana.
Hi, I was just wondering, I guess this is more like a hypothetical question. Do you think if you had stayed in California instead of going to New York, to Cornell, that you would have converted at the time that you converted, or maybe do you think that you wouldn't have converted at all?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I believe that all of it was part of like divine intervention. Like I feel that, especially for converts, I mean, I've often said that because it is such a difficult time now to become Muslim. I mean, it's much harder now than even it was when I converted back in 1994. But again, because it's like, why would you want to be Muslim? You know, like you would have people think you're crazy. They, you know, people think that you're, I mean, they could think all kinds of things about you, but nothing good, right? So it really takes, I believe, a divine intervention. Something has to happen, you know, and this is kind of where, like, also I believe that there are no coincidences. Like, God is vibrant, active, engaged part of your life. So I think it was intended for me to start that journey. It's not to say that I'm not talking about fate, like, you know, you have no choice in it. I feel like you're presented with opportunities and potentialities, right? And it's your choice what you decide to pursue. So maybe at some point in your life, you have, you know, 3 possibilities and you can only choose one, and each one will take you somewhere else. And I feel like that was a lot of what happened to me. Like, I had opportunities to learn and I took them, you know. So it's like, okay, I met my Muslim friends. I'm curious. Let's go get a book on Islam, you know, start reading it. Okay, this is very interesting. Should I keep reading it? You know, but I don't want to be Muslim. I don't see myself as Muslim. I don't want to deal with that. But then it's like, oh, but that was really interesting, you know? Okay, I'll read a little bit more. And then eventually it's like, you know, I want to feel what it feels like to put my head on the floor. Like when people pray, that's so weird, you know? But what is it? Why do people do that? How does it feel? And then I remember the first time I put my head on the floor. I'm like, whoa, you know, this is like very strange. Um, and like one thing led to another. And I do believe, like, for example, you know, being in New York and away from my family was really important, because my family, if I'd been in California, they would have been like, what the hell are you doing? You know, why are you thinking this? And I wouldn't have necessarily told them, but I would have felt a lot more like family pressure, right? And it's like when you get extracted from your familiar comforts and you go somewhere else, it's an opportunity to see the world anew. And I think that that's, you know, always an opportunity to change. So if you're at college, you know, and this is a chance for you to explore and to really question, like, okay, what do I, you know, what do I really care about? Um, so I think it was part of the plan, because then I think about, okay, well, then how did I end up, like, when I was finishing at Cornell, I desperately wanted to work for Procter and Gamble, which was like the #1 brand marketing company at the time. And I had a friend who used to work there, and I would practice and I would do my interviews and I did this and that other thing. You know, I just had my eyes set on that. And I couldn't for the life of me, like, I got an interview and it, you know, I thought it was okay. I didn't get it. And I was really disappointed. And then, like, the semester was coming to an end and I wasn't finding jobs, and I was like feeling really like, oh my God, what am I going to do if I graduate and I don't have a job? And then out of nowhere, I get this job opportunity at Johnson and Johnson in, you know, New Jersey. I go, I interview. It was like sort of last minute. Everything fell in line, and it was like I got a job offer. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. And then I go to New Jersey, and this is where I ultimately, you know, take the adult school class. I convert. I meet my husband. I blah 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 blah. And you start, you know, like when you start looking back on like just the path, this has happened now so many times in my life, where it's like when God intervenes with something, it happens so precisely. It's like everything just falls lockstep and it just happens with, like, I can't really describe it other than to say, like, you couldn't have planned it better yourself. It's just divine planning. So I believe that that played a role, you know. And anytime we've had any big change in our life, it's always been the same too. It's like it comes out of nowhere and then it just falls into place, and it happens like precisely, and like it just happens. So, you know, we now live in Ohio, and we never thought we would leave California. My husband's still a law professor, but he's immunocompromised, so he can't ever go back to a classroom, even though they say COVID is officially over. But so we did this crazy thing where we have 100,000 book library, which, if I don't know if, like, if you imagine, have you ever seen these like 50-foot trucks that drive on the freeway? You know, the ones that are really scary and they like drive past you and you're like, oh my God, you know, and it shakes your car. 5 of those to take our library. It took like 2 months to pack, 5,000 boxes. You know, so we had like 2 homes in LA. We were living in Van Nuys for 25 years. It was packed with books, very valuable books, and they were just not getting taken care of. And we had another house in Thousand Oaks because my husband was really ill. And so we also joked that between the books and the dogs and everything that we had, we used to rescue dogs too. So we were like rescuing tens of dogs at a time, that there was no space in this house. And so we were in 2 houses. And then just with a change of events, we were like, okay, we decided to move to outside of Columbus, Ohio during the pandemic in the middle of winter, driving in an RV with our 8 dogs. And, following this 5, caravan of books, we arrive in Ohio. Everyone's like, why are you moving from California to Ohio? We brought our nonprofit here. It's the most insane thing. But it was one of those situations where it literally came out of nowhere. Everything fell in line. It's like against all odds. And we somehow arrived here. And part of what we were doing was we came here to start our research project. So we drove across country, we came here, and then we started and we jumped into the con. And everything fell into place. And so it's like, okay, this is where we're supposed to be. But it, like, you tell anyone else, like, what an insane story, so that it's just been it's been a recurrent theme. But it's like if you leave everything to God and you say, all right, well, I just want to be in your service. So, what do you want me to do? Guide me. And then if you get a sign or an inkling and you go for it and it feels right to you, and you do it, and then you're like, okay, now, and you look back and you're like, okay, I see it. I see why it happened this way. It's really quite comforting too. It's beautiful, and it's nerve-wracking. You're like, the hair on the back of your neck stands. You're like, oh my God, what the hell are we doing? But it turned out lovely, And so, yeah, thank God. I mean, honestly, thank God for everything.
Well, thank God for you, Grace, because of all the work that you do. And, I don't think, the Usuli Institute would have definitely had the impact that it does without you. So thank you for all your work. And, everyone, I recommend you, if you do want to learn more about the religion, like definitely to check out Usuli Institute, and even just like about Islamophobia, and just be inspired, for the pursuit of social justice and bettering yourself. Definitely check out their stuff. I shared their link on the chat. But thank you again for joining us. And I hope I see you soon, inshallah.
This was really fun. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. And check out our books too. Our books, The Prophet's Pulpit, Volume 1 and 2. Very cool. This is like a dream to be able to, also launch a press and publish some high quality books that, hopefully non-Muslims can appreciate as well. So I would recommend that. But yeah, good luck to everyone. Wish you all the best in your journey. And yeah, feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions. So Professor Ramadan has my contact information. So thank you.
Thank you again, Grace. Take care.
Have
Have
a
a
good
good
rest
night.
of your evening.
Thank you. Bye.